Here is a claim that will sound harsh at first and merciful by the end. Most of what injures your soul does not come from the world's cruelty, but from the quiet contracts you sign with it. If you stay with me, I will show you how those contracts are written, how the Stoics learned to tear them up without rage or drama, and how a single sentence, simple, unadorned, older than Rome, can return you to yourself. I will not name that sentence yet. You will recognize it when you are ready. Before we go any further, a brief word of care. What follows is educational philosophy, not therapy or legal counsel or a diagnosis of anyone's life. I am a guide, not your physician or advocate. If your situation involves harm, threat, or abuse, seek qualified help in your own city and do it sooner than you find comfortable. Stoicism is not a stoic mask. It is a method for thinking and acting with clarity, not a command to endure what breaks you. Now, why this matters today should be obvious to anyone who has scrolled their way through 1,000 tiny storms before breakfast. We live in an age of permanent commentary, where the quickest speaker sounds like the truest one, and the most dramatic emotion seems like the deepest. We mistake noise for concern, possession for devotion, brazenness for honesty, and strategic silence for wisdom. Against that avalanche, the Stoics offer something unfashionable, a steady gaze, a slow breath, and criteria for judgment so simple they cannot be gamed. They are not here to flatter you. They are here to hand you back the controls. Let us begin where most trouble begins, with love that calls itself love while quietly drafting you into its service. There is a style of closeness that says, "I care for you," and then proceeds to make your needs feel like audacity. It is not always dramatic. It is most often domestic, and it comes wrapped in phrases that sound like care. Notice the pattern. Your boundary appears, a small request for time or space or a decision, and immediately a fog of guilt moves in. You are told you are ungrateful, selfish, cold, dramatic, too sensitive, not sensitive enough. The content shifts. The message does not. The message is, your center belongs to us. The Stoic answer is older than intersection quarrels and internet scripts. Epictetus would ask a single question: what is up to you? Your thoughts, your choices, your purpose, your willingness to assent, your time when governed by your reason, your good faith, your speech, your patience, your refusal to participate in your own diminishment. Everything else, another person's moods, their judgments, their stories about your motives, belongs to the wind and to them. The boundary begins there, not with an argument, but with jurisdiction. You can hear the wind in the second pattern as well, the voice that says, "I'm just being honest," while issuing tiny wounds in the name of truth. You know the sound. There is a subsonic vibration of contempt beneath the syllables, something corrosive wearing a philosopher's coat. The Stoic is not opposed to frank speech. Frankness is a civic virtue, but frankness without charity is not truth-telling. It is dominance theater. Seneca, speaking as an old man who had sent and received his share of sharp letters, reminds us that rebuke must be a medicine measured for the patient, not a poison poured for the crowd. If sincerity makes you smaller every week, if it arrives without any commitment to your improvement, it is not medicine. It is appetite. The remedy is not to fire back with equal bite. The remedy is to ask what this person is aiming at: your welfare, your humiliation, your compliance, or their own relief. Aim matters. Stoic truth points toward repair. There is a third costume the shadow likes to wear: protection. I only worry about you, says the controlling hand as it reaches for your calendar, your friends, your future. Control is the insecure child of fear. It does not want your good. It wants to be the wall around you and the lock on the gate. It often arrives after an uncertainty, a crisis, a loss, when your defenses are tired and the promise of safety sounds like a warm room in winter. But read the small print. Does the protection expand your capacities or does it shrink them? A physician's protection restores your health so you can walk on your own. A jailer's protection convinces you the open air is dangerous. The Stoic will measure by outcomes. Am I more free, more competent, more responsible for myself, or am I being preserved in a jar? The language can fool you, the results do not. Then there is the technique that attacks your inner compass directly. I do not need the modern term for it. You know what it means to be asked to doubt your senses until you start borrowing someone else's sight. The Stoic approach is unforgiving here. We begin with impressions, what presents itself to the mind, and then we test them. We ask, what is the raw fact? What is my interpretation? What is the assumption I am sneaking in from yesterday's story? When someone insists that your raw fact does not exist and does so habitually, we are no longer in the world of honest disagreement. We are in a campaign to replace your instruments with theirs. The practical practice sounds like a school exercise, and that is by design. Write down what was said. Record what was done. When, where, in what tone, with what effect on you. Compare with prior patterns. Share the record with a neutral mind if you must. You are not trying to win a court case. You are trying to protect navigation. A life at sea cannot spare its compass. A fifth pattern is less visible and therefore more damaging. It is the quiet dismissal of your inner life. Perhaps you press a tender thought forward, a plan, a dream, a piece of work that feels like your fingerprint. You know this feeling, a mix of exposure and excitement. The response is not violent. That would at least acknowledge you. The response is a smirk, a joke curving downward, a change of subject, a casual verdict of cute or impractical. One dismissal you can forgive. We have all misfired in conversation. A regular diet of dismissal is something else. Under it, the soul starts to shiver. You begin to self-censor. You call the silence maturity. It is not. It is shrinkage. Marcus counsels us to love our particular work, to keep returning to the thing that is ours to do while letting other people's theaters pass by like weather. If your closest circle cannot protect that work from mockery, rearrange the circle before you rearrange your soul. There is a cousin of dismissal that is easier to name, the chronic absence of empathy. Empathy is not the performance of tears. It is the willingness to hold another person's reality long enough to understand its structure. Without that bridge, intimacy cannot exist. There can be transactions, there can be performances, there can be convenience, but not intimacy. The sign you are in such a famine is that you begin to compress your feeling into smaller and smaller parcels, to make them easier to carry, easier to justify, easier to budget for. You volunteer to be simple so that you do not burden the union. Do not do this. It does not buy peace, it buys foreclosure. The Stoic does not require another's empathy for their own tranquility, but the Stoic does require that relationships be governed by justice. Justice is not a poem. It is giving each what is due. If your pain always comes last on the schedule, you are not in a just arrangement. One more pattern, and this one is the most theatrical. Betrayal, not the single, tragic breach that sometimes occurs in the difficult art of being human. I mean the rehearsed cycle. Breach, apology, relief, repeat, until apology itself becomes the way the other person avoids change. We are asked to be magnanimous, and it is good to be magnanimous. But magnanimity is not gullibility. Seneca again, with his cool clarity. The first debt is owed to the harm, the second to the repair. When repair never comes, you are not forgiven. You are financing. The Stoic will take stock with numbers, not moods, promises made versus delivered, time frames agreed to versus met, tolerances given versus used. Stoicism is not romantic about patterns. It considers them. A quieter pattern is trickier because at first it sounds like a virtue. I am independent, says the person who never calls, never plans, never meets you where you live. Independence is beautiful. Stoicism is a school of self-command. But self-command expressed as indifference to the shared life is not independence. It is an alibi. The Stoic examines whether the good claimed, the freedom to stand on one's own, rests upon a neglect of duties owed. Real independence does not starve the bond. It strengthens it by carrying its share without complaint. False independence uses your patience as the cushion that makes neglect cheap. There is also the dagger that looks like a joke. You have been in rooms where humor is a means for correcting rather than connecting, where the person with words for hands finds pleasure in the little win of a well-aimed line, too sharp for the moment, too frequent for chance. If you live there long enough, you become a curator of your own dignity, watching for theft. Humor is good. The ancients were not stone, but humor that repeatedly costs you your self-respect is not humor. It is a tax. You are allowed to be unamused by the bill. And then there is silence used as a whip. Stoicism teaches us to pause, to refrain, to put a moment between impression and assent. That pause is not the same as punishment. When silence is used to disturb your sleep, to induce you to chase, to keep you off balance, it ceases to be restraint and becomes control. Calm is a gift. Coldness is a tool. The difference is motive. The Stoic practice here is disarmingly simple. Name what is happening without ornament, describe your standard, and then live by it. When days pass without reply after conflict, I lose trust. I will not beg for contact. I will not punish with silence. I will continue with my duties. When you are ready to speak, speak as an adult. You're not scripting another person. You are stating terms for your own sanity. Let me pause for a micro summary, because long journeys reward landmarks. There are many forms of breach, and they often masquerade as their opposite. Control appears as protection, contempt as honesty, silence as wisdom, mockery as play, absence as independence, apology as change. The Stoic art begins by reassigning names. To name rightly is to judge rightly. To judge rightly is to act adequately. To act adequately is to keep your soul in one piece. You are not deciding who is bad. You are deciding what is yours to live inside. I promised stories. The first is a preventable downfall. It concerns a composite figure I will call the architect. She designs houses for a living, but like many who design shelter for others, she does not always live in one herself. At first, the man she loved spoke like a guardian, asking after her deadlines and bringing soup to late nights at the office. Then one evening, he suggested, almost as a kindness, that certain colleagues were not good for her. Then he suggested she give him access to her calendar so they could optimize her week together. Then he began to appear at the firm uninvited and spoke to the receptionist about how long she had been at lunch. Every step was wrapped in concern. "You deserve better than these people. I'm protecting you from their games." The architect's friends fell away, not with a bang, but with a series of reschedulings. She slept more, dreamed less, canceled more, apologized more, explained more, designed less. A year later, she looked up and did not recognize the drawings on her own desk. A Stoic intervention did not arrive as a confrontation. It arrived as a list, a simple inventory of what belonged to her control and what did not. She drew 2 columns in her sketchbook. Mine, not mine. In mine, she wrote presents to her craft, the terms of her friendships, the boundaries around her time. Under not mine, she wrote another adult's anxieties, judgments, and strategies. She did not accuse, she rearranged. Passwords were changed, calendars were reclaimed. Meetings with friends were scheduled with the same seriousness as client presentations. The relationship, unwatered by compliance, cracked. The end was not comfortable, it was clean. When her first house after the break won a modest prize, she cried in the restroom not because of the plaque, but because the drawings looked like her again. Had she been angrier earlier, it would have felt good and accomplished little. The old philosophers would have recognized her choice as prohoresis, moral purpose returning to the helm. Preventable downfall was prevented on the second attempt, not by fury, but by jurisdiction. The second story is a delayed awakening. It concerns a quiet man I will call the teacher. He was not an academic. He taught carpentry at a vocational school and could make a chair from a tree with the serenity of a priest performing a rite. At home, however, the temperature was wrong. His partner, a brilliant talker, narrated his motives for him, explained his errors to him, and chose the terms of every piece. If the teacher tried to lay out his sense of things, the very fact that he appealed to evidence was used to portray him as rigid. If he said nothing, his silence was used as proof that he was sulking. Jokes landed near the bone, then were defended as sophistication. For a decade, he lived as if calmness were cowardice and dignity were stubbornness. When he first read Marcus, he thought it was cold and closed the book. He did not want a school that told him to swallow. But he returned later and found something different. Not a command to swallow, but a structure for sorting. He took to writing events as they occurred, like a foreman logging the day's work. What was said, what time, what was promised, what was delivered. He did not weaponize the record. He normalized his senses with it. One winter morning during a small storm about whether he had abandoned a conversation by going to teach, he opened the notebook and saw the pattern exactly as it had unfolded in 5 earlier arguments. His awakening came not with a shout, but with a sentence that did not budge. "I will participate in repairs, not in rehearsals." That line became a hinge. Some reparations were made, others were not, and he reoriented accordingly. He did not become a philosopher. He remained a man who makes chairs. But his home became a place where jokes heal after they land, where apologies are bridges to new behavior, and where silence is a rest, not a rope. The third story is a transformation that worked, and I choose it for balance because the aim is not to train you to leave everyone. The protagonist is a composite of several couples I have seen, and I will call them the sailor and the scholar. The sailor learned sarcasm young. He grew up in a family where love was a race to the sharpest line. The scholar grew up in a thoughtful home where honesty arrived well-wrapped but could be delayed for years. They loved each other out of their strengths and hurt each other with their styles. In their first years together, the sailor's jokes cut deep, and he would say genuinely, "I'm just being honest," as if honesty were exempt from craftsmanship. The scholar's silences felt punitive to him, though she swore they were retreats to safety. The Stoic hinge here was a shared experiment in virtue as practice, not identity. They agreed to treat humor as a tool for connection and to measure it by its effect, not by intention. If the laughter rose but trust fell, humor was failing. They agreed to treat silence as a cooling space and to put a time on it so it did not become a moat. They read short pieces of Epictetus aloud like people who had inherited a workshop manual. Tools to be tested, not scriptures to be defended. And here was the transformation. Neither demanded that the other become a Stoic. They practiced Stoic habits as a shared craft. Over time, the sailor's wit became a shield he used on her behalf instead of a blade he tested on her. The scholar's pauses became a signal of respect, not a lever of power. They will quarrel again. They are human. But the art is working because the ship turns when the wind shifts. That is all we ever have. Each of these stories hides a handful of principles that are easier to understand than to enact, but they become easier with repetition. First, right naming. Call things what they are, even when they appear in attractive clothing. Second, jurisdiction. Decide what belongs to your governance and refuse the conscription that comes disguised as care. Third, patterns over promises. You are not unkind when you believe the calendar more than the apology. Fourth, repair as a criterion. Change that does not arrive in action is not change. It is an anesthetic. Fifth, dignity without drama. You do not need to announce your boundary like a town crier. You need to live it like a craftsman. We should be honest about a fear that sits behind all of this. The fear that drawing lines will shrink our world. It can, if your lines are weapons. But the Stoic line is not a wall. It is a riverbank. It allows life to move with force without dissolving into a flood. To test whether your boundary is a wall or a bank, ask yourself whether it increases your obligations to your own best self. If it does, it is a bank. If it only keeps others out while making you smaller inside, it is a wall. It is tempting to imagine that a perfect philosophy will effortlessly manage every difficult person. There is no such tool. The Stoics were not utopians. They were emergency planners who also loved sunrises. They teach you to carry a kit, clarity of judgment, selective attention, mastery of speech, the courage to act without resentment, and the humility to learn. This kit cannot keep a man from mocking you, but it can keep his mockery from becoming your policy. It cannot stop a woman from withholding affection, but it can stop you from chasing with self-contempt. It cannot outlaw betrayal, but it can protect you from funding the sequel. That is how philosophy becomes muscle. Perhaps you worry that these standards demand superhuman composure. They do not. There is room here for grief, anger, disappointment, and for the humor that returns once the cutting stops. Stoicism is not the denial of feeling. It is the refusal to be governed by feeling as if it were a sovereign. In fact, your emotions will become cleaner when you stop using them to negotiate for basic respect. Anger that arrives to protect a boundary is different from anger that arrives because you have not drawn one. Sadness that honors a real loss is different from sadness maintained as a currency in a household economy. You may ask, how do I start right now without turning my life into a seminar? Start with a small act of right naming in your daily script. When you hear, "I'm just being honest," translate it silently into your own language. You are prioritizing your relief over our repair. When you hear, "I was protecting you," translate it as, "You were managing your fear by managing me." When you are tempted to apologize for asking for time, translate it as, "I am stewarding my life." Then, in speech, do something radical. Use fewer words than usual. The point of a boundary is not persuasion, it is calibration. I hear your concern. My calendar is mine. I'm willing to talk when jokes aren't knives. I prefer repair to repetition. Practice these lines aloud when no one can hear you, the way a musician plays scales. You are training your mouth not to trap your mind. Next, institute a practice at the end of the day that Marcus would recognize and that modern life tries to make obsolete. A review, not a legal brief. 5 minutes. What did I consent to that I did not mean to consent to? Where did I ask for less than I needed? Where did I confuse being agreeable with being good? Where did I act with courage? Where did I persevere in folly? There is no scolding allowed. The point is to become a better witness of your own life. The better witness decides more justly tomorrow. You will notice something after a few weeks. Certain relationships will become easier. As if someone oiled the hinges, others will squeak louder. That sound is information. It is not proof that you are doing philosophy wrong. It is proof that architecture resists renovation. Some rooms need paint, some need new windows. A few must be raised. The Stoic does not dramatize this. He rolls up his sleeves, since sleeves were made for rolling. Because I promised to close my loops, let me open the chest I carried at the start and give you the sentence. It is not a magic charm. It is a principle translated into a line light enough to memorize and heavy enough to matter. Say it, write it, put it where you can see it until it lives in you. I will not participate in my own harm. Do not turn it into a slogan. Turn it into a sieve. Pour your decisions through it and watch what remains. Arguments in which you surrender your sanity to buy 5 minutes of quiet do not survive the sieve. Apologies given for the sake of being allowed to stay in the room do not survive it. Schedules shaped by other people's panic do not survive it. The joke you will hate yourself for accepting does not survive it. Friendships that laugh at your calling do not survive it. The pleasures that slow bleed you do not survive it. The sentence is not heroic. It is hygienic. Let me anticipate an objection from the generous heart. Isn't there a danger that this posture becomes self-absorption dressed as self-respect? Yes. Philosophy without other people becomes vanity. Self-respect without other people's good becomes selfishness. The Stoic cures this with the counterweight of cosmopolis, the idea that we are citizens of one vast city built by reason and goodwill. Your boundaries are not bunkers, they are maps that allow you to show up usefully. The person who will not participate in their own harm becomes better company, better neighbor, better colleague, better lover, not because they are invulnerable, but because they are not busy negotiating their worth every minute of the day. You cannot offer steadiness you do not possess. Allow me a final return to Jung from the periphery, since his shadow walks through modern conversation and the video that sparked ours borrows his lamp. Jung warned that what remains unconscious governs us, and we call it fate. The Stoics would express the same observation as a training problem. Unexamined impressions become habits. Habits become character. Character sets your course. The difference matters. One description tempts you to mystical passivity, the other to daily practice. We can honor both insights by choosing practice. Let the unseen become seen, not for self-fascination, but so you can revise what is unworthy and reinforce what is sound. Then fate becomes less an edict and more a path you can walk with clear eyes. If you stay with this long enough, a curious thing happens. You no longer want to win arguments. You want to inhabit reality. You do not chase validation because you are busy with work you respect. You find that some jokes become funnier when no one bleeds. Apologies become rarer and deeper. Protection starts looking like equipping, not enclosing. Silence becomes a joint rest, not a solo punishment. Honesty acquires the tenderness of a craftsman sanding an edge. Independence turns into the quiet competence of a teammate who makes the whole team stronger. None of this is dramatic. That is its beauty. The soul does not need a fireworks display. It needs room to breathe. As we approach the end, take stock without flattery. In the last hour, you have learned to name the masks. Control dressed as care, contempt dressed as truth, erasure dressed as humor, absence dressed as strength, coldness dressed as calm. You have tried on the Stoic kit: right naming, jurisdiction, pattern recognition, repair as criterion, dignity without drama. You have watched an architect reclaim her plans, a teacher revise the script of his home, and two lovers turn tools into tenderness. These are not fables. They are, in different ways, the underwater shape of many lives. Trace yours without shame. Then decide one place, one where you will stop participating in your own harm. Do that, and the rest will not be easy, but it will be clearer. When you are ready to continue, we will go deeper into the companion skill that makes all of this possible. The art of saying no without hostility and yes without self-betrayal. It is the next chapter of the same story, the part where boundaries learn to speak in complete sentences and relationships either grow into the room they deserve or reveal that they never intended to. For now, carry the sentence, carry the kit, and remember the most stoic of mercies. You are allowed to begin again today.